Hi, good morning. I'm Craig, and this is Marauder's Mike. And Marauder's Mike is a place where every Neville out there has a safe place to speak. What I'm going to be doing today is finishing the second half of Seen and Unforeseen, Chapter 26, Harry Potter from Book 5, Order of the Phoenix. As I go along, I will tab things in the text that indicate things to me. And then when we get to scene breaks or natural transitions, I will stop and I will go back through the scene and call out what I see in the way of systems inside the individuals of thought. And you wonder what's going to happen if I put a thought onto that live. I don't know, but I will tell you this: you'll be safe. I'll think about it. We can think about it together. It'll be all right. And I only mention that for those who have been watching for a while and they're not sure if they want to contribute. It'll be fine. I forgot to mention this tagline last time around. This is a YA book, but this is not a YA read. Some of the material covered can be a little dense and it can be a little emotionally heavy. So if you need to step away for any of the themes that emerge, do so. Take care of yourself. It makes sense. You can circle back later. And no, I think that was about all I had. With no further ado, let's resume Chapter 26B. Harry and Ron waited until break next morning to tell Hermione exactly what had happened. They wanted to be absolutely sure they could not be overheard. Standing in their usual corner of the cool, breezy courtyard, Harry told her every detail of the dream he could remember. When he had finished, she said nothing at all for a few moments, but stared with a kind of painful intensity at Fred and George, who were both headless and selling their magical hats from under their cloaks on the other side of the road. So that's why they killed him, she said quietly, withdrawing her gaze from Fred and George at last. When Bode tried to steal this weapon, something funny happened to him. I think there must be a defensive spells on it or around it to stop people from touching it. That's why he was in St. Mungo's. His brain had gone all funny and he couldn't talk. But remember what the healer told us? He was recovering. And they couldn't risk him getting better, could they? I mean, the shock of whatever happened when he touched that weapon probably made the imperious curse lift. Once he'd got his voice back, he'd explain what he'd been doing, wouldn't he? They would have known he'd been sent to steal the weapon. Of course, it would have been easy for Lucius Malfoy to put the curse on him. Never out of the ministry, is he? He was even hanging around that day I had my hearing, said Harry. And hang on, he said slowly. He was in the Department of Mysteries corridor that day. Your dad said he was probably trying to sneak down and find out what happened in my hearing. But what if... Sturgis, gasped Hermione, looking thunderstruck. Sorry, said Ron, looking bewildered. Sturgis Podmore, said Hermione breathlessly. Arrested for trying to get through a door. Lucius Malfoy got him, too. I bet he did it the day you saw him there, Harry. Sturgis had Moody's invisibility cloak, right? So what if he was standing guard by the door, invisible, and Malfoy heard him move, or guessed he was there, or just did the imperious curse on the off chance that a guard was there? So when Sturgis next had an opportunity, probably when it was his turn on guard duty again, he tried to get into the department to steal the weapon for Voldemort. Ron, be quiet. But he got caught and sent to Azkaban. She gazed at Harry. And now Rookwood's told Voldemort how to get the weapon. I didn't hear all the conversation, but that's what it sounded like, said Harry. Rookwood used to work there. Maybe Voldemort will send Rookwood to do it. Hermione nodded, apparently still lost in thought. Then quite abruptly she said, But you shouldn't have seen this at all, Harry. What? He said, taken aback. You're supposed to be learning how to close your mind to this sort of thing, said Hermione, suddenly very stern. I know I am, said Harry, but, well, I think we should just try and forget what you saw, said Hermione firmly, and you ought to put a bit more effort on your occlumency from now on. The week did not improve as it progressed. Harry received 2 more D's in potions, was still on tenterhooks that Hagrid might get the sack, and could not stop himself from dwelling on the dream in which he had seen Voldemort, though he did not bring it up with Ron and Hermione again, because he did not want another telling off from Hermione. He wished very much that he could have talked to Sirius about it, but that was out of the question. So he tried to push the matter to the back of his mind. Unfortunately, the back of his mind was no longer the secure place it had once been. Get up, Potter. A couple of weeks after his dream of Rookwood, Harry was to be found, yet again, kneeling on the floor of Snape's office, trying to clear his head. He had just been forced, yet again, to relive a stream of early memories he had not even realized he still had, most of them concerning humiliations Dudley and his gang had inflicted upon him in primary school. That last memory, said Snape. What was it? I don't know, said Harry, getting wearily to his feet. He was finding it increasingly difficult to disentangle separate memories from the rush of images and sound that Snape kept calling forth. You mean the one where my cousin tried to make me stand in the toilet? No, said Snape softly. I mean the one concerning a man kneeling in the middle of a darkened room. I'm just going to tag that one real quick. There is probably a scene in the upcoming where somebody tries to make Harry stand in a toilet, and it probably has an uncomfortable association for him, which has just been seeded for us now. It's nothing, said Harry. Snape's dark eyes bored into Harry's. Remembering what Snape had said about eye contact being crucial to legitimacy, Harry blinked and looked away. How do that man and that room come to be inside your head, Potter? It, said Harry, looking everywhere but at Snape. It was just a dream I had. A dream, repeated Snape. There was a pause during which Harry stared fixedly at a large dead frog suspended in a purple liquid in its jar. You do know why you're here, don't you, Potter? Said Snape in a low, dangerous voice. You do know why I'm giving up my evenings to do this tedious job? Yes, said Harry stiffly. Remind me why we are here, Potter. So I can learn occlumency, said Harry, now glaring at a dead eel. Correct, Potter. And dim though you may be. Harry looked back at Snape, hating him. I would have thought that after 2 months' worth of lessons, you might have made some progress. How many other dreams about the Dark Lord have you had? Just that one, lied Harry. Perhaps, said Snape, his dark, cold eyes narrowing slightly. Perhaps you actually enjoy having these dreams and visions, Potter. Perhaps they make you feel special, important. Oh, Snape. No, they don't, said Harry, his jaw set and his fingers clenched tightly around the handle of his wand. Has he seen any adults role model this behavior for him lately? I think he has. That is just as well, Potter, said Snape coldly, because you are neither special nor important, and it is not up to you to find out what the Dark Lord is saying to his Death Eaters. No, that's your job, isn't it? Harry shot at him. He had not meant to say it. It had burst out of him in a temper. For a long moment they stared at each other, Harry convinced he had gone too far. But there was a curious, almost satisfied expression on Snape's face when he answered, I don't currently have an explanation for that, but I'm really curious to see what information that Snape wanted he was just provided and he believes. Yeah. Yes, Potter, he said, his eyes glinting. That is my job. Now, if we are ready, we will start again. Ah, okay. He raised his wand. 1, 2, 3. Legilimens. 100 Dementors were swooping toward Harry across the lake and the grounds. He screwed up his face in consternation. They were becoming closer. He could see the dark holes beneath their hoods. Yet he could also see Snape standing in front of him, his eyes fixed on Harry's face, muttering under his breath. And somehow, Snape was growing clearer, and the Dementors were growing fainter. Harry raised his own wand. Protego. Snape staggered. His wand flew upward, away from Harry, and suddenly Harry's mind was teeming with memories that were not his. A hook-nosed man was shouting at a cowering woman, while a small, dark-haired boy cried in a corner. A greasy-haired teenager sat alone in a dark bedroom, pointing his wand at the ceiling, shooting down flies. A girl was laughing as a scrawny boy tried to mount a bucking broomstick. Enough! Harry felt as though he had been pushed hard in the closet. He took several staggering steps backward, hit some of the shelves covering Snape's walls, and heard something crack. Snape was shaking slightly, very white in the face. The back of Harry's robes were damp. One of the jars behind him had broken when he fell against it. The pickled, slimy thing within was swirling in its draining potion. Reparo, hissed Snape, and the jar sealed itself once more. Well, Potter, that was certainly an improvement. Panting slightly, Snape straightened the pensieve in which he had again, stored some of his thoughts before starting the lesson, almost as though checking that they were still there. I don't remember telling you to use a shield charm, but there was no doubt that it was effective. Harry did not speak. He felt that to say anything might be dangerous. He was sure he had just broken into Snape's memories, that he had just seen scenes from Snape's childhood. And it was unnerving to think that the crying little boy who had watched his parents shouting was actually standing in front of him with such loathing in his eyes. Let's try again, shall we? Said Snape. Harry felt a thrill of dread. Oh, I like that. He was about to pay for what had just happened. He was sure of it. They moved back into position with the desk between them, Harry feeling he was going to find it much harder to empty his mind this time. On the count of 3, then, said Snape, raising his wand once more. 1, 2. Harry did not have time to gather himself together and attempt to clear his mind, for Snape had already cried, Legilimens. He was hurtling along the corridor toward the Department of Mysteries, past the blank stone walls, past the torches. The plain black door was growing ever larger. He was moving so fast he was going to collide with it. He was feet from it, and he could see that chink of faint blue light again. The door had flown open. He was through it at last, inside a black-walled, black-floored circular room lit with blue-flamed candles, and there were more doors all around him. He needed to go on. But which door ought he to take? Potter. Harry opened his eyes. He was flat on his back again, with no memory of having got there. He was also panting as though he really had run the length of Department of Mysteries corridor, really had sprinted through the black door and found the circular room. Explain yourself, said Snape, who was standing over him looking furious. I don't know what happened, said Harry truthfully, standing up. There was a lump on the back of his head from where he had hit the ground, and he felt feverish. I've never seen that before. I mean, I told you, I've dreamed about the door, but it's never opened before. You are not working hard enough. For some reason, Snape seemed even angrier than he had done 2 minutes before, when Harry had seen into his own memories. You are lazy and sloppy, Potter. It is small wonder with the Dark Lord. Can you tell me something, sir? Said Harry, firing up again. Why do you call Voldemort the Dark Lord? I've only ever heard Death Eaters call him that. Snape opened his mouth in a snarl, and a woman screamed from somewhere outside the room. Snape's head jerked upward. He was gazing at the ceiling. What the? He muttered. Harry could hear a muffled commotion coming from what he thought might be the entrance hall. Snape looked around at him, frowning. Did you see anything unusual on your way down here, Potter? Harry shook his head. Somewhere above them, the woman screamed again. Snape strode to his office door, his wand still held at the ready, and swept out of sight. Harry hesitated for a moment, and then followed. And this seems like a great place to take a break. All right. In the absence of current viewer commentary, I'm going to pull up some not yet discussed commentary from Katie on book 522, I believe. Yeah, we already talked about the chairs bit. Naturally, murmured Dumbledore, apparently to himself, still observing the stream of smoke without the slightest sign of surprise, but in essence divided. This is a fun Horcrux clue. It is. And I don't want to go too much into the Horcruxes and Voldemort and the connection with Harry. Not too much yet, because we still have a lot of books to go. But a person could make an analogy that if processes like trauma do something like fragment the cohesive integrity of an individual and their identity into shatters, and recovery would look something like reintegrating those shattered fragments into a cohesive whole. With that sort of lens, Dumbledore asking about essences being divided can take us to some really interesting thoughts. It's interesting that you likened the Harry Voldy connection to Will in Stranger Things, because I'm pretty sure Stranger Things took that concept from Harry Potter. I'm not prepared to fire back on that one, but I'm pretty sure I've seen that concept a couple of times before Harry Potter. But I don't know. Nothing's coming to mind. I mean, when Dustin is talking about the rules of D&D and the mechanism for how they use will in that role, that stuff was in D&D back in the 80s, and I remember role-playing that stuff with some of my friends. So the concepts already existed in this space. I just can't attribute them to where they actually came from. JKR had originally planned to kill Arthur off in this book. I'm very glad she didn't, because that would have been devastating. She changed her mind because she realized he was one of the only genuinely good father figures in this series. Yeah. And that's one that I also can't really do anything with because we haven't seen the series play out yet. It might not just be for that and for his own sake, but if Arthur was written out, how would that affect Molly and how she shows up later in the ways that she needs to? Because her story would change, and maybe she would not realistically be capable of what her role required of her if she was grieving her husband? I have no idea, but it's worth considering. And then Sirius is being very responsible here. It's a rare moment for him, but possibly it's because he's the only adult in the room and needs to step up during a life or death situation. I also think he wants to do his part for the Order in any way he can, so keeping the kids at Grimmauld Place is the best thing he can do right now. He's showing a lot of restraint as well when it looks to Harry as if he wants to hit Fred. Sirius is being responsible, and it's a rare moment. Do you think it being a crisis situation is what brought out the responsibility in him? Because that would be interesting. Could be true. All right, let's take it back to tabs in the books. We'll clear up these tabs and then we will figure out what the shrieking is all about. All right. And I will point out that Harry and Ron waited to tell Hermione because they wanted to be absolutely sure they could not be overheard. Information security. And on that theme, the next conversation unfolds. He was even hanging around that day I had my hearing, said Harry. And hang on, he said slowly. He was in the Department of Mysteries corridor that day. Your dad said he was probably trying to sneak down and find out what happened. So, again, we have a hypothesis about information. And then we get this explanation of how this sequence might have transpired, and there are a lot of steps involved. Is such a thing possible to do with that many steps? Yes, the history of real world espionage certainly has examples of plots that complicated. But they're also highly prone to failure. It takes a lot of extra steps. So that's interesting. And he's trying to talk to Hermione, and then she starts closing it down. Quite abruptly, she says, "You shouldn't have seen all this." "What?" he says, taken aback. And then Hermione tells him what he's supposed to be doing sternly. And he says, "I know, but," and she cuts him off firmly. And I'd like to point this out. Already in this chapter, Harry has had great success. He was feeling great. We just had a party, and he was the hero. From that peak already, the week did not improve as it progressed. The shine didn't hold for all that long. All right, now, when we consider from the perspective that some of this Harry Potter is potentially a trauma narrative, then Harry choosing to suffer the discomfort repetitively of confronting memories that he didn't even recognize he still had, you could certainly find an analogy in there for doing the work of therapy. It's nothing. It's nothing, said Harry. Snape's dark eyes bored into Harry's. Remembering what Snape had said about eye contact being crucial to legitimacy, Harry blinked and looked away. We're going to save that one for later, but let's not forget that. Snape is actually frustrated. I would have thought that after 2 months worth of lessons, you might have made some progress. How many other dreams about the Dark Lord have you had? Snape is actually frustrated, and that was a real question. Just that one, lied Harry. And then Snape's cold eyes narrow slightly. Is it because we believed Potter? No, it's not because we believed Potter. And then Snape probes him. Cheap, fast, but it should turn a result. Potter, do they make you feel special? Important? And then Harry gets mad. No, that's your job, isn't it? Harry shot at him, and it came out in a temper. But Snape looked satisfied. Yes, Potter, that is my job. Now, why might Snape be satisfied in this moment? Let's consider the title chapter, Seen and Unforeseen. Harry Potter in this chapter has been very seen. There are other characters in this chapter who chronically feel underseen. Snape, as a professor and a head of a house, is certainly seen, but the role that actually costs him that he continues to perform, he is very unseen in, so that Harry potentially sees Snape as filling a valid role instead of just being a hated teacher. That might be what's giving Snape some satisfaction in this scene. Just some recognition of Snape's role within the larger scope of things. And we can tell Snape's getting frustrated because he keeps putting these memories back into this pensieve on the expectation that Harry will actually be successful. He has not been caught off guard with this because he keeps expecting Harry to get it. Harry did not speak. He felt that to say anything might be dangerous. He was sure he had just broken into Snape's memories. And then Snape, very professionally, says, "Let's try again, shall we?" Harry felt a thrill of dread. He was about to pay for what had just happened. He was sure of it. We have an expectation. They moved back into position with the desk, and Harry feeling he was going to find it much harder to empty his mind this time. And then something completely different happened. Now, we know his body didn't actually go anywhere. Are there any other things that could make somebody pant as though they really had run the length of Department of Mysteries corridor, had really sprinted through the black door and found the circular room? Do we have any alternate explanations out there, people? I've dreamed about the door, but it's never opened before. And then Snape fires back with, "You are not working hard enough." Is it possible that Snape doesn't understand this particular problem? So instead of trying to engage in the problem, he's diverting Harry away from the problem because Snape doesn't know what to do about that. And the way we divert is we tell Harry that he is not working hard enough. You are lazy and sloppy, Potter. It is small wonder that the Dark Lord. And that's actually been a coherent complaint of Snape's the entire time. Poor attention to detail and not a lot of effort put in. I'm definitely not supporting Snape as a human being or a teacher, but as a teacher, his criticism of Harry's performance has some validity to it. The way he shares his criticism Not good. And then we get some screaming. Let's go back to that. The screams were indeed coming from the entrance hall. They grew louder as Harry ran toward the stone steps leading up from the dungeons. When he reached the top, he found the entrance hall packed. Students had come flooding out of the Great Hall, where dinner was still in progress, to see what was going on. Others had crammed themselves into the marble staircase. Harry pushed forward through a knot of tall Slytherins and saw that the onlookers had formed a great ring, some of them looking shocked, others even frightened. Professor McGonagall was directly opposite Harry on the other side of the hall. She looked as though what she was watching made her feel faintly sick. Yep, and let's notice McGonagall's expression. Professor Trelawney was standing in the middle of the entrance hall with her wand in one hand and an empty sherry bottle in the other, looking utterly mad. Her hair was sticking up on one end, her glasses were lopsided, so that one eye was magnified more than the other. Her innumerable shawls and scarves were trailing haphazardly from her shoulders, giving the impression that she was falling apart at the seams. Two large trunks. Oh, focus on the luggage. Two large trunks lay on the floor beside her, one of them upside down. It looked very much as though it had been thrown down the stairs after her. Professor Trelawney was staring, apparently terrified at something Harry could not see, but seemed to be standing at the foot of the stairs. Wow. If we stick with the luggage metaphor, that's some powerful stuff right there. No, she shrieked. No, this cannot be happening. It cannot. I refuse to accept it. That's a problem. You didn't realize this was coming? Said a high girlish voice, sounding callously amused. And Harry, moving slightly to his right, saw that Trelawney's terrifying vision was nothing other than Professor Umbridge. Incapable though you are of predicting even tomorrow's weather, you must surely have realized that your pitiful performance during my inspections and lack of any improvement would make it inevitable you would be sacked. You can't, howled Professor Trelawney, tears streaming down her face from behind her enormous lenses. You can't sack me. I've been here 16 years. Hogwarts is my home. It was your home, said Professor Umbridge, and Harry was revolted to see the enjoyment stretching her toad-like face as she watched Professor Trelawney sink, sobbing uncontrollably, onto one of her trunks. Until an hour ago, when the Minister of Magic countersigned the order for your dismissal. Now kindly remove yourself from this hall. You are embarrassing us. But she stood and watched, with an expression of gloating enjoyment, as Professor Trelawney shuddered and moaned, rocking back and forward on her trunk in paroxysms of grief. Harry heard a sob to his left and looked around. Lavender and Parvati were both crying silently, their arms around each other. Then he heard footsteps. Professor McGonagall had broken away from the spectators, marched straight up to Professor Trelawney, and was patting her firmly on the back while withdrawing a large handkerchief from within her robes. There, Sybil. Calm down. Blow your nose on this. It's not as bad as you think now. You are not going to have to leave Hogwarts. Oh, really, Professor McGonagall, said Umbridge in a deadly voice, taking a few steps forward. And your authority for that statement is? That would be mine, said a deep voice. The oak front doors had swung open. Students beside them scuttled out of the way as Dumbledore appeared in the entrance. What he had been doing out in the grounds, Harry could not imagine, but there was something impressive about the sight of him framed in the doorway against an oddly misty night. Leaving the doors wide behind him, he strode forward through the circle of onlookers toward the place where Professor Trelawney sat, tear-stained and trembling, upon her trunk, crying on her baggage. Professor McGonagall alongside her. "Yours, Professor Dumbledore?" said Umbridge with a singularly unpleasant little laugh. "I'm afraid you do not understand the position. I have here," she pulled a parchment scroll from within her robes, "an order of dismissal signed by myself and the Minister of Magic, under the terms of Educational Decree 23. The High Inquisitor of Hogwarts. The High Inquisitor of Hogwarts has the power to inspect, place upon probation, and sack any teacher she, that is to say I, feel is not performing up to the standard required by the Ministry of Magic. I have decided that Professor Trelawney is not up to scratch. I have dismissed her." To Harry's very great surprise, Dumbledore continued to smile. He looked down at Professor Trelawney, who was still sobbing and choking on her trunk, and said, "You are quite right, of course, Professor Umbridge. As High Inquisitor, you have every right to dismiss my teachers. You do not, however, have the authority to send them away from the castle. I am afraid," he went on with a courteous little bow, "that the power to do that still resides with the headmaster, and it is my wish that Professor Trelawney continue to live at Hogwarts." At this, Professor Trelawney gave a wild little laugh in which a hiccup was barely hidden. No, I'll go, Dumbledore. I shall leave Hogwarts and seek my fortune elsewhere." "No," said Dumbledore sharply. "It is my wish that you remain, Sybil." He turned to Professor McGonagall. "Might I ask you to escort Sybil back upstairs, Professor McGonagall?" "Of course," said McGonagall. "Up you get, Sybil." Professor Sprout came hurrying forward out of the crowd and grabbed Professor Trelawney's other arm. Together they guided her past Umbridge and up the marble stairs. Professor Flitwick went scurrying after them. His wand held out before him. He squeaked, "Locomotor trunks." And Professor Trelawney's luggage rose into the air and proceeded up the staircase after her, Professor Flitwick bringing up the rear. Professor Umbridge was standing stock still, staring at Dumbledore, who continued to smile benignly. "And what," she said, in a whisper that nevertheless carried all around the entrance hall, "are you going to do with her once I appoint a new divination teacher who needs her lodgings?" "Oh, that won't be a problem," said Dumbledore pleasantly. "You see, I have already found us a new divination teacher, and he will prefer lodgings on the ground floor." "You've found," said Umbridge shrilly. "You've found." Does that remind you of a scene with Petunia? "You found," said Umbridge shrilly. "You found." "Might I remind you, Dumbledore, that under Educational Decree 22, the Ministry has the right to appoint a suitable candidate if, and only if, the headmaster is unable to find one," said Dumbledore. "And I am happy to say that on this occasion I have succeeded. May I introduce you?" He turned to face the open front doors, through which night mist was now drifting. Harry heard hooves. There was a shocked murmur around the hall, and those nearest the doors hastily moved even further backward, some of them tripping over in their haste to clear a path for the newcomer. Through the mist came a face Harry had seen once before on a dark, dangerous night in the Forbidden Forest. White blonde hair and astonishingly blue eyes, the head and torso of a man joined to the palomino body of a horse. This is Firenze, said Dumbledore, happily, to a thunderstruck Umbridge. I think you'll find him suitable. Oh, I am no better at divination than Trelawney because I did not see that one coming. That was an interesting way to end this chapter. Wow. All right, so I'm going to bring back some old Katie comments from video 22. Weave those in here, and then we'll do the tabs in the chapter roll-up. And we'll get out of here. We've done all those. I really like the descriptions of Harry and Sirius being intruders upon the family grief, and then later, Harry not wanting to intrude on the Weasleys' happiness. He feels responsible, and unfortunately the others need someone to blame, and Harry is the messenger. Harry did not know whether he was imagining it or not, but he fancied there was something accusatory in their looks. Even though Harry didn't tell them exactly how he saw the vision, he is still their only connection to what happened to their dad. Their reaction is only validating his feelings of guilt in his own mind. Now, I like that comment here, but this is a really tricky one to unpack delicately because there is something of a mechanic like that where people frequently blame the people that bring the news. As an example, I have worked in companies where if there's something wrong with a metric, let's say some particular number that is important to the company doesn't look very good, people can be afraid to tell the boss because it is a very real thing where when you tell somebody the bad news, you somehow, it's as if for them, you assume some responsibility for having had happened. So I like that. That was a very nice comment. Thank you. And we can observe that in other people and sometimes ourselves all we like, but it doesn't make it wrong because it's a thing that humans just do and we should be aware of. And then back to the comments. I really like the descriptions how each of the Weasley children behave during the kitchen scene with Sirius, and then later when their mom arrives. I especially like how it shows Fred and George behaving differently. A lot of readers just think they are one personality, but there are lots of moments that show they have their own unique personalities. That's deep. Yeah, there's some thinking in here that goes back to the idea about the sacred twins, and I'm going to hold that a little bit later. Yeah, we are getting towards some of the thoughts that need to be wrapped up in book 7 or further down the series. But yeah, another great comment. Thanks for throwing that one out there. I really like that Molly got on well with Sirius. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I forgot to put that up. Probably because nobody's watching. There we go. That's up for anybody that watches the replay. Also, yeah, thanks for letting me circle back to that. Also, the kitchen scene shows us if we're trying to figure out how being in a family with that many kids might pressure different children into forming different roles within that family system. It's a good chance to observe how the different characters interact with each other and differently from each other and use that as a sort of comparison. I really like that Molly got on well with Sirius and thanked him after arriving back from seeing Arthur. It's situations like this that show a person what really matters and to put their differences aside. Yeah, I mean, I think we can disagree on things and still find a way to show appreciation and caring and concern. Yeah, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to the next chapter. It's one of my favorites in the book. Wow. That would be 523 long in the past, so I hope the performance satisfied. Let's go back to the tabs. And that's where we started the screaming, which is a well-timed intervention in the fight that appeared to be escalating. Very convenient timing. No, she shrieked. I refuse to accept that. Now, if we put on our considering trauma as a perspective hat, what do we think about a screaming refusal to accept something that appears to be actually happening? I don't know for sure, but nothing good. All right. We're going to try and do this because I think it's appropriate for this scene. We're going to try to navigate two different lenses at the same time. One lens is that of Umbridge as an institutional actor deliberately putting on this confrontation. And the other is the cruelty which she's putting on Trelawney, because this is deliberately cruel. And then also, like a bonus mix between the two, there are strategic implications in this scene on top of the other two. And I'll try to unpack that as best as I can as we roll through this. All right. You can't sack me. I've been here 16 years. Hogwarts is my home. I'm not saying what this is or what there isn't, but I'm pretty sure there's something whose first stage is denial. But she stood and watched with an expression of gloating enjoyment as Professor Trelawney shuddered and moaned, rocking backward and forward in paroxysms of grief. I don't know a lot about body language, but rocking backwards and forwards is not usually a great sign that somebody's in a good place. And then McGonagall comes in, and McGonagall is very focused on providing what care and empathy she can in the moment, but still she is still coloring inside the lines that Umbridge is putting down. McGonagall is doing what she can inside of Umbridge's frame. And Umbridge is prepared to have this argument in public. This whole thing is very, very conspicuously public. Yours, Professor Dumbledore, said Umbridge with a singularly unpleasant little laugh. And then she pulls out a piece of paper. A paper that only needed two signatures. Hers and somebody that Dumbledore is pretty openly fighting with. What safeguards do the people have against such reckless authority in this system of Hogwarts? To Harry's very great surprise, Dumbledore continued to smile. Now, Umbridge started off smiling. She was enjoying the show. She had a plan for this. I don't know exactly why Dumbledore is continuing to smile, just like I don't know exactly why Hermione was smiling when yet another decree goes up against the wall. She does explain one thing. I see a couple other potentials there. It could be Dumbledore continued to smile because he's already got a plan, which seems likely. It could be he's continuing to smile because he anticipated all of this sequence that is going down, which is also possible. He might be smiling because he has no bloody idea what to do, and it's disconcerting in situations like this when you calmly smile at the people that you're in the situation with. All kinds of options. All right. And then Dumbledore says he wants Trelawney to remain. And then she gives a wild laugh and a barely hidden hiccup. And she's not sure if he wants. So she is like, I'll go, I'll leave. No, said Dumbledore sharply. It is my wish that you remain civil. She needed to be told directly. Not implied, not inferred. She needed to be told directly to her face by Dumbledore that he wanted her to stay. And then once Dumbledore has said it, McGonagall is now inside Dumbledore's framework. Of course, said McGonagall. Up you get, Sybil. And then Professor Sprout came hurrying forward. And then together, they guided her past Umbridge and up the stairs. And all of a sudden, now that we're out of Umbridge's framework, which had the trunks thrown down the stairs and upside down with a crying woman on them, now the other faculty of Hogwarts are handling the trunks behind the woman with respect and dignity and care, now that they're in Dumbledore's frame. Professor Umbridge was standing stock still, staring at Dumbledore, who continued to smile benignly, which I'm sure must have been very off-putting for her. And what she said in a whisper, are you going to do? Oh, that won't be a problem, said Dumbledore pleasantly. And then she gets shrill. You've found, said Umbridge shrilly, you've found? Might I remember that under Educational Decree number 22. Now, here's where knowing other fiction is really helpful. Because sometimes pieces of paper are incredibly powerful. But as Cersei Lannister taught us in Game of Thrones, sometimes it's just a piece of paper. Just like a map is not the terrain, a paper policy is not reality. Although it certainly can affect reality. And then we have, yes. And it could be argued with some sense of timing, having established enough control of the perception of what's happening at Hogwarts, if we were going to conduct a campaign of destabilizing Hogwarts so that Dumbledore could be removed, removing Trelawney has several advantages, but removing her like that cruelly and that publicly has an additional advantage in not only does everybody else become subsequently more scared, but everybody believes she actually does have the power to do such a thing. And by having achieved the perception of the power, she is much less likely to be questioned or receive any pushback about it in the future. There is a saying that power perceived is power achieved. So this was, on one level, a bid to increase her perceived power in the institution by publicly humiliating another human. And Dumbledore did not let it pass. And this is why Umbridge gets shrill. Because she was trying to control... This is why I think Umbridge gets shrill. She was trying to control for a specific outcome. And it had nothing to do with sacking Trelawney, because Trelawney is still sacked. She got what she wanted in the limits of her authority, and she is still furious. That sort of says to me that what she wanted and what she says she wanted are only very loosely correlated, and she had a bigger agenda, which is not dissimilar from when Petunia freaks out because what she wants is something like deny the existence of magic and be continually angry at the memory of her sister. But that's not really what she says she wants unless she's super stressed. What she wants in her normal functioning is to know everything about everybody around her and never be paid attention to and to be seen as completely normal and boring. So I do feel like those two are roughly analogous. As far as the rest of the chapter roll-up, I think this continues to shape right now in a conflict of narratives between the Ministry of Magic and Hogwarts, and on another level between Harry and the world, and then the seen and the unforeseen. The Minotaur, unforeseen, but there are also unseen characters directly referenced in this book. Snape gets a little bit more visibility, at least in Harry's eyes, as to his actual role and function. And then Neville, in this chapter, is considering making himself seen, something like Harry did. Yeah, a lot of themes in this chapter. It's like a whole Spy Neville novel wrapped up. And we're at page 589. I don't know why I said that. That's not the end of the chapter. All right, we're on page 599 for this Scimitar and this Sneak. And I will schedule that next live soon. All right, well, for anybody that catches the replay, I hope you enjoy it. I'll see you later. Have a great day.